Welcome to an impromptu, I guess, like Christmas solo show. And as you can probably tell, if you're watching this, I'm in a holiday rental in Newcastle, Australia, my hometown. I'm obviously here for Christmas. And if you're listening to it, apologies if it sounds a bit bathtubby. It's a holiday rental. Anyway, I wasn't sure how this was going to go or what I was going to do with it. So I thought I'd just jump on a live stream and talk about this year, because if you've been following the blog for a while, I mean, I used to write about this a decade ago, right? So this is Christmas, and what have you done? I always took it as accusatory, but sometimes in a good way, like, what have you done with your year, right? It's supposed to be just more of that awful neoliberal pap. We're in the end stages of Western civilization, so it doesn't work like that now. But I always get to this time of year, as most people do, and I think, well, what have I done? And in the case of 2022, if you listen to the astrology podcast, well, not the astrology podcast, if you listen to Austin and my episode last week, 2021 was the worst year of my life, and 2022 is in the top 3. So I wanted to just kind of talk over it. Merry Christmas to you too, Tanya. I just sort of put this up on YouTube because one of the things I want to talk about at the end, as a matter of fact, is what we do with the show and like Rune Soup and whatever in 2023. But to get there, we have to go on a little bit of a journey, a little bit of a journey through 2022 and look at the goods and the bads, right? And it's just gone sunrise here on the summer solstice, because of course it's Southern Hemisphere, and I thought there's a good time energetically to chat about it, right? So yeah, I want to begin. Oh, and what I've done, if you were listening to this, because I'm not even sure, like this is just a live stream. If it works out, I will put it out as a podcast, as a solo show. So if you're listening to this, I guess it worked out. Hello from the future, right? But I do have, I can't believe I'm actually doing this. I do have some holiday snaps, if you will, and not because they're any good, they're just phone photos, right? Let me just bring these in and up. They are just phone photo. No, I want it this way. But it's kind of how I organize the year, right? Like, I'm sure you're the same. It's like, well, what happened this year? Go to Google Photos, start in January, and move up to now. And so this is what we're going to do. And January 2022 is an interesting one because I was still, I'll explain the health journey when we get to June. But January of this year was the month where I'm like, okay, let's do the full detox component of this health journey, right? Because we just got, let me move into my slide, well, not slides. So I was working on the book in Hobart. I just took a picture of where we were in the Airbnb. This is my beach, right? It looks a lot more tropical than it is. It's fantastic. I do the Wim Hof thing now, so the fact that it's cold water doesn't bother me necessarily. So January, we just got an infrared sauna at Christmas. I'm like, cool, this is the bell is rung. And when I say I did a detox, obviously that's the usual stuff. And it's like a keto carnivore detox, which is to say no seed oils, no plant material to speak of, obviously no booze, no caffeine. And when I say no caffeine, one of the things I did, which was a game changer, was coffee enemas for 2 weeks with specialty stuff, specialty coffee for it. So when I say no caffeine, it's more that I didn't drink the caffeine, if you follow. And the turpentine protocol of not like Dr. Daniels, because she uses sugar, which I couldn't have because of the detox. But the Soviets used to use that for a blood cleanser. So turpentine, for people who don't know, if that sounds insane to you, it's basically essential oil of pine, right? So it's a natural treatment. It's just that if you buy it from a big box hardware store without noticing, we sometimes sell things that are called turpentine that are like petrochemical byproducts. Do not drink them, right? But if you get a natural organic turpentine, it's literally essential oil of pine. And as Dr. Daniels points out, it was used by the slaves and whatever as a remedy. But the Soviets used it for heart treatment because it was a blood cleanser when taken. And I'm not sure how well it worked because I still had symptoms. I had improved. It was an interesting journey, right? So in 2021, the heart symptoms began in June and then ended up in hospital in September. Then then they went away, then they came back, and they were like towards the end of the year, and they're associated with stress and the despair, and that was awful, right? Because again, we forget, if you weren't in Australia, at the beginning of the year, we still weren't allowed to leave the country, and the government still expected us to use those apps to check in places and all this kind of stuff. It was sort of coming out of the tyranny by January, but that's what we just come through. So there's a lot of reasons for the trauma to stick around. Anyway, that was January. And the other thing that happened in January was, as I said to Miguel, I was going to leave the country one way or the other once we were allowed to, and potentially not come back because of the aforementioned tyranny, of course. And Miguel had that conference in Mexico, and the Americas was where I was looking anyway. And I'm like, well, this seems like fate. And thus commenced, basically running down the clock of when I could get the Novavax, which is the non-mRNA injections, right? Because you need injections if you're not American to go through Fortress America, and you still do. It's basically one of the only countries that it's dealing with this insanity. And of course, I wasn't going to have the mRNA ones for reasons that I think even those idiotic proponents of it over the last couple of years have worked out why by now. So I was running down the clock because to be considered fully V'd, I don't want to use the word, right? It had to be 2 weeks after your second injection. And they kept delaying the Novavax again and again and again and again, because obviously my government, like yours, works for Pfizer, right? And so they wanted people to get the mRNA ones. So they only let the Novavax out of the cage and once everyone had capitulated. Not me, but once everyone else had capitulated. And so coming back to the slides, this is my little nephew, I found a pharmacy that was using or handing them out, injecting, I guess, offering them before the official embargo was up, which meant within 2 days, I was considered injected to enter Fortress America. So it was down to the wire, but it was fun. Like I got to hang out with my little nephew and so on. And so that was like January to March. And I knew it was going to happen or whatever. And in between that time, the other big thing was, of course, Animistic came out. And these aren't my photos, of course. That's Watkins Books in London. But some readers sent it in going, hey, I was just walking past Watkins and your book is in the window. And it's one of those kind of, exciting moments, right? So the big career news or whatever you want to call it was Animistic for me. And it was the Scarlet's biggest ever pre-order. It's got in the hands of people that I did not expect it to, like in a good sense. Yeah, right. I wish I could tell you, but big names and life-changing stuff. From a discourse perspective, it's more. I was expecting more, but I don't think in fact, I've been told this, people don't quite know what to make of it or what to say other than they really like it. So this 2022, one of the things that made it such a good year was that Animistic finally came out and some of the method to my madness was revealed and so on. So the year has been defined by that, right? So because we were still trapped in the country, we didn't get to do a book launch or anything, but I did leave to go to Mexico several weeks after, and that became the book launch. Well, because I had a couple of copies of it because I wanted to take it to give it to a friend of mine in the jungle in July. And so I went on a book tour in the sense that I toured my book through places like, Mayan ruins and the Amazonian jungle and whatever. And so whilst we didn't get like a book launch party, because I think I certainly wasn't going to have a Zoom one, not so many years into this idiotic nonsense. It deserved better than that. But yeah, so Animistic was like, if you want to say career-wise or creativity-wise, a big part of why I liked this year, and to receive the feedback on it and so on has been very, very pleasing. Mexico was exactly moving into March, right? Mexico was exactly. Oh, hang on, before we get there, because I hadn't flown anywhere in 2 fucking years, I booked a business class flight, and the business class lounge was closed. So I got upgraded to the first class lounge, and that's the Qantas first class lounge. If you're watching this on the screen share, right? And I'm working on the slides for the conference while I'm there. But that was kind of like a welcome back to travel And it's not really a welcome back to travel, as people who are aware of my forecast knows. That was the last ride of Gordon the White before he becomes Gordon of Gaunt, which is still what my Twitter handle is now, right? And as we head into 2023, I think people are getting a feeling of that. It's really surprising to see, I think, magically operant people who are like, I might go on this cruise and I might go here and there. And I'm like, really? We're looking at different things. Anyway, so we get to Mexico. Let me just scroll down. This is interesting, right? I'm not, shall we say, an all expenses hotel person. The venue was fine. Like they were really helpful for us running a conference and so on. But because I stayed there extra time to do this diving, if you're watching along, let me tell you a place you don't want to be on your own is an all exclusive hotel that's pretty much catered to Americans who live in states where they've never seen the ocean going on spring break, right? And I don't say that in a judgmental way. They've got to go somewhere. But it's like big groups of, I don't want to call them school kids. They're grown-ass adults, but you know what I mean. And they're all hanging out they go on a friend's trip, right? You're there like in the buffet of an evening on your own. That was weird. So no shade on the hotel or anything. It's just if I was to do that again, the conference isn't going to be held at the same venue again. But if I was to do that, if I was to have my druthers on that, I would have stayed at an Airbnb because they also got weird about bringing people in because obviously it's all expenses. So you have the sort of shame bracelet that tells you you can have whatever drinks and food. But if you don't have that, people are like, what are you doing here? So that wasn't my choice or anything. But it was interesting, an interesting learning, right? And there's Maria Sabina, and that was the best chilaquiles I had on the trip. So Mexico was exactly the healing that I needed, the first phase of the healing that I needed, because in many respects it was quite unhealthy. Well, it is quite unhealthy. Seed oils are in everything. Obviously, you're drinking a lot. You're drinking Mexican beer. Let me find some of it. And oh yeah, this bar, like mezcal, Mexican beer, all the rest of it. But it was part of the healing journey because it was the first time in a couple of years to actually fully, deeply relax. And when you're on a heart trauma healing journey, that's the essential first step. So that was good. And getting to Merida, this is, I would send photos of me watching RuPaul to Colin because this is the back courtyard of where we were staying in Merida. It's got a little pool. I showed up there, probably got Carunca, but this is where I spent 6 weeks working on the book and living elsewhere outside of the tyranny of Australia, as that all sort of came through. But that also included watching RuPaul because there's always some kind of RuPaul on, right? But I am obsessed with, when I say I'm obsessed with Mexico, it's a weird thing about fate, right? Like when Miguel said, do you want to speak at this conference in Mexico? I'm like, that's so fucking weird. I intend to be in the neighborhood at the time, right? So again, Mexico, good magic, good food. Let me go back to that, right? Being able to do all that kind of fun stuff that we haven't been able to do for a while. Those drinks, that's a good example of not eating that healthy. They're delicious, but there's like Gatorade and vodka and I don't know what else is in it, right? But Merida was beautiful, or is beautiful. That was a really good spot, right? And getting to go to, and I still haven't written about it because it's been so busy. I've written about some of the ruined trips, but the most impressive one for me was Calakmul because that's down in the south, right? It's quite close to Guatemala. And this is the part of the jungle where if you're ever going to see jaguars in Mexico, you'll see them because it's Guatemala adjacent. North Mexico, it's all been, North Yucatan, it's been cut down many a time, right? And you could actually feel the spirit of that there. And I had jaguar dreams before going to Calakmul. And Calakmul itself was just, yeah, that was one of those bucket list places. Didn't get, if I ever get to go back, they're in Guatemala rather than Mexico, but like Tikal and all those other kind of major cities. But the one I wanted to see, everyone has to go to Chichen Itza, and I thought that was bad. But Calakmul was the one for me, right? Yeah, I went to Texas with Star.Ships in my bag. Very good, Tanya, right? Mezcal. So Ren, I spent $119 on a bottle of Australian, on a bottle of mezcal there, Ilegal, which is, dare I say, middle of the road. But I remember on my last night in that pool, drinking the Bruxo dos. I think I wrote about this and saying it makes the world bigger again to know that I can't get the same mezcal I can in Mexico as I can in when I'm in Tasmania, because there are things that you should have to go on adventures for. In the same way, I spent 6 months trying to get 6 weeks trying to get a decent bottle of wine anywhere. And I'm a wine snob. I live in a wine growing valley. I'm from a wine growing valley, right? And going into Walmart, Mexico, as the best option for wine buying in Merida, and even that didn't work. And I think it's supply chain stuff, right? Because the wine, it's so hot there, and it's got to get from wherever it comes from, Spain mostly, and it's going to be sitting in distribution centers and warehouses that are probably unair conditioned. So the wine is half cooked by the time it gets here. It's disgusting. On the last night, I went with some Mexican friends, this will come up again, to an Argentinian steakhouse, because I'm like, these people will have wine. And they did, and it was good. But in the same token, I'm like, I shouldn't complain about the shitness of the wine in Mexico when the mezcal's good, and vice versa. Tasmania makes excellent wine and isn't exactly known for its mezcal. So it balances out, right? Anyway, jumping back to the holiday snaps, right? Yeah. So that was Mexico. Oh no, let me tell you about, here's some more of them. Yeah, speaking of Calakmul, like just look at that. And I got to do some ceremony there in preparation for the event in Austin, but also just in general. Part of the healing tradition that I lineaged in with your mesa, my teacher, it wasn't part of the course per se, but my teacher said, if you go on adventures, take your mesa with you. And I do that with magical objects anyway, like prior to actually being a mesa carrier. You kind of know that intuitively. It's like, I'm going to take this crystal or this talisman with me and have that co-experience the journey. And so this is quite the adventure bundle now, right? Like, it's been in jungles and rainforests and what have you. But this stuff was exactly the medicine that I needed for it. And again, a place that I still return to in dream fairly regularly, right? But Merida, when James came over, because I went and did the book and he came over for 2.5 weeks, and that became like our holiday for the year, because I was still working, I was having clients and working on the book and doing the show and whatever while traveling. And but the 2.5 weeks he was there, that was sort of like the holiday bit. And we do that, everyone knows that thing where you like look at the price of real estate in the place you're visiting for a holiday. And in the case of where we were staying in Merida, it's like, no, we're about 25 years too late to be able to afford that. But also with the way the world's going and where our journey has been at, and this is a big part of what 2022 was for me, was to find out where I was supposed to be. And I'll tell you that story when we get to Ecuador. We would joke about there being dimensions near this one where we live in Merida, right? We go places that are like, we absolutely could live here, but it's weirder than that. It's like, I somehow do live here. And yeah, Merida was that. And this is one of the final evenings. But this is cool, right? Like, what I needed, and I'll tell you here's a little tip for any other authors out there. When I was writing my first few books in London, so Star.Ships and, Pieces of Eight was mostly London, but Star.Ships and Chaos Protocols, all I fucking wanted was a pub in the countryside, in the mountains somewhere. And we'd go to Cumbria and stay in a pub for a few days, and I'd work on the book and whatever. And then I go back to London and go, I can't write this here. Oh, I just need to be in the countryside where it's quiet to write. And then I got that, and and it only works sometimes. The rest of the time, it's like, what you actually just need is a change of scene, right? And so if you live in the countryside like I do, you need cantinas, right? Or whatever that version happens to be, diners if you're in New York. Well, there's not that many left, at least not in Manhattan, but you know what I mean. The buzz of the world is also useful. And Merida was great for that. And so that's inflected in Fortune's Fools, which is days away from being complete. And I'll tell you about that at the end. But yeah, so that last night in Mexico, in Merida anyway, before flying, and I'll explain in a minute, the crowd of twinks that I fell in with this time, no lesbians, and only one gay, but they're still twinks, took me out, and we went to the Argentinian place, and then like come out afterwards. And Mexico, or at least Merida, is one of those places where you get bottle service in clubs, and I'm not, my clubbing days are mostly behind me, shall we say. And also, I'm on like a healing journey out of a life-threatening illness at this point. And so they bought a bottle of Bacardi for the table because they're in their early 20s or whatever. And so, like, I have these twinks pouring Bacardi into my mouth, like straight from the bottle on the dance floor. And I'm like, if I die of a heart attack right now, people will say, yeah, that's exactly how he goes out. It was that or some kind of shock. It was going to either be one of the two. It's like he died on a Mexican nightclub dance floor, having Bacardi poured in his mouth by a gang of twinks. I'm like, yeah, that would have been a good exit. Nevertheless, I did not die, but I just had to go till there was enough time as they were pouring in my head to go, if I die because of this, yeah, fuck it. So yeah, I was intending to go from Mexico to Colombia on part of this heart healing journey because I was investigating weird stuff like stem cell treatment. At one point, I was going to write a book about like alternative heart treatments and so on, but that kind of fell through. So I had this gap of almost a month. I had a gap of a month. So I extended my time in Mexico before I had to get to Peru for my dieta. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just, as part of the healing journey, here's the thing about ayahuasca, right? Very often it's not a volume game in the same way. I've discussed this about herb lore and homeopathy and so on a bunch of times on different shows. But sometimes it is about a volume game, right? Particularly if you require physical healing as opposed to healing at the level of the non-physical and having that flow down. And there was certainly a physical component of this healing journey. So I'm like, okay, cool. Well, I'll double up on the ayahuasca. I'll find somewhere else. I'll sort of have a pre-dieta ayahuasca trip. And I found, so that's how I ended up in Ecuador. I was also going to look at property, but first, Quito really surprised me. It's one of those cities like Lima, which I also love, that people don't spend time in because they happen to be the capital city of a country that is amazing, right? And so people kind of land there. And in the case of Ecuador, obviously, it's the jungle, it's the Galapagos. People don't spend that much time in Quito. Same thing with Lima. Peru just has everything wondrous, ruins and Cusco, Machu Picchu, the Amazon. No one spends any time in Lima except to fly in and out of the place. I like it. And I liked Quito. Quito was, if you guys remember, well, millennials out there will, Dinotopia. Quito reminded me of the town in Dinotopia, right? Because you're sort of nestled in the Andes and it feels hidden. Or maybe Gondolin, because I'm just reading Silmarillion. It's this beautiful city, almost hidden by mountains. And maybe you can see what I mean there with the, like the Dinotopia feels. Anyway, really like Quito, got sick and didn't do much in Quito. And then finally made it to Vilcabamba. And this is actually why I thought I would go to Ecuador, just to see if it's a place I could live. And spoiler, it is. And in fact, I made, this is where I watched the eclipse. That is the eclipse happening. So I lay in a hammock in the town where the Inca used to go on holiday. And it's a blue zone, again, hidden village in the Andes, watching the eclipse, having Austin say, don't watch it for too long. Astrologers spoil all your fun, right? But it's like, stay out, don't get too much of the baleful rays. And I'm like, yeah, fine. It's true, right? But this was, Vilcabamba was amazing. And I ended up putting an offer on a farm, which isn't here, like in the Andes and I thought that was it. Because actually, as soon as I got there, most of the heart symptoms went away. And I'm like, that's very interesting. So, or even just on the level of perhaps I have to live here so I don't die, I thought about it. So that's what we did. So I put in an offer in the place, and that was literally on the last day. And when I say put in an offer, that's quite involved because it's like, well, how do we do this? We can't get a loan in Ecuador or any of that stuff. And so I now have a bank account and a lawyer who's got power of attorney. Like we went the whole way down it in Cuenca. And I was doing all of this from Cuenca, which was the place I was heading to get to my ayahuasca retreat. So I made it really complicated for this poor real estate agent. Abundant Living Ecuador, by the way, love them. So if you are looking to go to Vilcabamba, may I recommend Ryan from Abundant Living, the very patient Ryan. And he sees the world very much the way, shall we say, we do. Anyway, yeah. So then I got to Cuenca, and this is another one of those moments where I'm like, what the hell? why did no one tell me this place existed? And to the extent, this is something, in 2019, when I first went on Dieta, I was talking to James at the end of the Dieta, because you have to fly out back to Australia via Chile, via Santiago. So I'm just sort of sitting there the night before we fly out, or I fly out back to Australia, talking to James, messaging. And I'm like, I think we become South America guys. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like, honestly, inappropriately wearing the woven hats and everything. It's like, wow. And I'm like, yeah, I'm as surprised as you. To the extent that had we gone home from London via South America, we may not have gone home, right? That was the level that it was at. And one of these places, and it's the expat capital of Ecuador, it's Cuenca, right? And it's a place, again, in another lifetime. And I'll get to why that's significant a bit later. Cuenca rocked my world, and that's a place I would go back to. That's a place, again, if the world was different and it wasn't like so expensive to get there now, and not just across the ocean, all flights are now more expensive, but it's quite difficult to get to Ecuador. There aren't that many flights, so it's not like it's a direct. Anyway, this would be a place that you'd want to spend 6 weeks working on a book or painting or, some kind of creative project. Amazing spot. And then we get to the retreat, the first round of ayahuasca. And so to pick the story back up, I had put in an offer on a place, got power of attorney in a bank account, and then gone to my ayahuasca retreat. And that first night, and this is the Maloca, where we're setting up, and this is a lot fancier than what happens in the jungle, right? So that first night, get on the medicine, and I'm like, I need real estate advice. So I'm asking ayahuasca, like, do I live here? Do I move forward with this? And she essentially feigned a lack of understanding. Like, she was honestly like throwing me postcards of Tasmania, but not of like pretty Tasmania, not of like the nice stuff, like Cradle Mountain and Dove Lake and all the rest of it. Just random pictures of sort of like the highway in between Hobart and Launceston, sort of passing a gas station, and just this sort of quotidian rhythm. And she just kept showing me these pictures, like pretending she didn't understand. And I eventually got the message. Wasn't ready to hear it, but the answer was, no, you idiot. You do not move to a farm in the Andes. And I'm like, okay, cool. So that was, good to know, right? At least that's another thing I can put in the bucket or put in the fire. Now, let me tell you a bit about this retreat, because people will ask about it. I am not going to name it, and I would actually go out of my way to not recommend it for a reason I'm about to say. I actually met some really great people on it. It was really interesting I mentioned this in the solo show From the Jungle. It's really interesting to be around, not that I'm an expert or anything, but like to be around beginners when it comes to ayahuasca and what people come to with their initial trauma, especially if they don't have access. And I spoke to one of the event runners about it. People who don't have access to the same, like I have access to Terence McKenna's shaman, right? Most people don't. So where do they go? They go to a place like this. And then really it is up to them to do the healing. And so I was, for a reason I'm about to tell you, I thought long and hard about actively not recommending this place. And instead, because of the people I met and the sincerity of most of the people who work there, I went in the direction of, no, I'm just never going to mention it. Because that's the right thing, I think. It does honor to the people I met there and the people who were sincere. But let me tell you, one of the San Pedro ceremonies was so unprofessional as to be dangerous. And the woman running it was like re-traumatizing sexual abuse survivors. I can't even begin. If I told you what would happen, people who have gone through that, I would have to say trigger warning. And I mean that. Like, I was speechless at the unprofessional level of ceremony that was involved there. And that alone was enough not to do it. But also, a lot of the ceremony, I don't want to call them shamans, the ceremonial facilitators were younger than me, which isn't that big of a deal, right? Like, but in their mid-20s, trying to run sweat lodges that take people through like the 4 stages of human life from birth to death. And I'm like, you guys, and they got too high, so they're sort of giggling through it. And so basically, from a ceremonial perspective, I can't recommend it. And rather than unrecommending it, I just leave it up to fate as to whether or not you end up somewhere like that if you're going on your own ayahuasca journey, right? That's where I've settled on it, because I got a lot out of it. Met some cool people, but also it was a big and important part of the healing journey, because this is where I started to do the physical healing. That first night, I was coughing up. It was like metal. I was basically purging out of my vascular system, but stuff would hit the bucket with like a chink, chink sound, like I was purging alien implants. I looked to see if that's what it was. So I went and did the very physical work. I just this is one of those examples of like, actually, I'll tell you this, because I told everyone who was new the same thing. When it comes to ayahuasca, if you can stand up, this goes for most people. Like if you're in a good ceremony, but if you can stand up, you should probably have more medicine. Because what happens is you take the first round, and then you start to get the effects of it. But you feel kind of like warm and lazy and sort of okay, and you don't feel like getting back up again when they call you for more medicine. My policy is if I can stand, I haven't had enough medicine, right? And this is so it was a volume game because I was doing physical healing, and so the medicine itself there was good. And you'll get what you want out of it if you take it, and so on. But yeah, that was a story. But it was very important for the physical level of healing, so that when I got into the jungle to do the sort of master level non-physical healing, I'd been pre-prepped for it. So that was my Ecuador journey, right? And then we get back to Peru, and Lima. Last time was so much fun. I had a couple of weeks there, did some work again, fell in with a crowd of lesbian twinks. Still in contact with them. This is the Lima Grey. I took this picture like this. I'm just staying at the Holiday Inn by the airport, right? And just the grey of Lima it was just fun to be back, right? But then instead of spending time in Lima, I spent 4 or 5 days in Pucallpa, which is the capital of the Ucayali region, a city in the middle of the jungle, and kind of like the Shipibo capital, right? So, and it was great. It was kind of like a real holiday where I'm sitting there and it was pouring with rain. It's the Amazon, whatever, but there's like a pool and what have you. The town itself was amazing. And another one of those places where, again, because I'm sort of playing Are You My Mother? Like where am I supposed to ride out the apocalypse? And maybe I live in Pucallpa because it's fucking fun. Anyway, didn't. And ayahuasca kind of showed me Pucallpa as this is weird, but she showed me it as like a spider den, but like sticky and loving. So you know how mothers like the smell of like their baby's diapers because of that deep bodily, gross, sticky, lovely connection. That's how she showed me like this is the Shipibo village. If you look at it in spirit vision, these guys all know each other and are related and have been for a really, really long time. But one of the things she showed me when I finally got to the jungle was why during a trauma incident I want to move to South America. This is just more Pucallpa, right? Is if you picture a pie chart of past lives, I've spent about 22% of them, which is the biggest slice, not the majority, right? But like the biggest slice in South America. So every time, it's just like when you have a trauma incident, you want to go home. My version of that, when it's a big trauma, is the Americas, is South America in particular. And she's like, yeah, but it isn't this time. And I'm like, fine, right? So a big macro part of my journey of being in the Americas was not just the healing, and I'll come to that now, but as part of that healing, this is me doing more work in the jungle, but as part of that healing, finding out where I belong, right? And not just where I belong, but where I'm best positioned, where I'm supposed to be. And that was the sort of key to it. It's like, where am I supposed to be? And that's a really good way of thinking about it for everyone else, rather than like, where do you want to be? It's like, well, where Charles Eisenstein has this prayer, may I be put to good use. And that's the level that I mean it, right? Like, where am I put to good use? So it was at this point that my actual heart was telling me in ceremony, I want to go home. And I have to say, like, not yet. We still have healing to do. And once we got into the jungle, it was about night 2, ceremony-wise. That was the highest and biggest I'd ever been. machine elves, the full thing, like into this this multi-dimensional carnival of like Ferris wheels and all kinds of stuff. Amazing. And the giggling, I just called them Los Chicos, like the boys, right? But I get the machine elf thing now, right? Anyway, that final purge was the healing. And picture it like this. So what she showed me was a 2-year journey from the trauma incident, which was the June before, kind of coming down in like a V shape to that low point going, you have now healed, right? And between now and next June, which is of course my birthday, is the return to an excess of physical fitness. Because the really sad thing about when this heart stuff happened was, by the way, this is evidence that you can just do it on a level of stress and emotion. I was a couple of weeks from my goal weight. It was a few weeks out from my birthday, turning 40 last year. That's right. And it's like, okay, this is the big 4-0. So I spent the first half of 2021, getting fit, doing all this kind of stuff. And it was that when I went into hospital, they're just checking all this stuff, going like, well, you're too young, the blood pressure, all this kind of stuff. What happened? I'm like, they weren't interested that my heart had literally broken, which of course it had because of everything that was going on. So the second half, coming back to this, is like, your heart is now, from ayahuasca's perspective, healed. Congratulations, you have healed your heart. However, you are now because of the journey you were just on, obviously a lower level of fitness, which you now have to climb out of. So that's kind of like the job for now. I'm Jupiter in Aries is my 6th. So that's timed really well. That's literally like, an expansion of like getting swole even, but like, I'm not going to get swole, but you know what I mean? The space weather between now and my birthday is good for where that goes. But that was the kind of healing story that I got from ayahuasca. This is, if you're unfamiliar with the sort of amazing food that one can eat. God, this is a very 2022 picture, right? There's the Lenormand cards, Mexican candle, Alberto's oracle deck behind that, the cat's claw I was drinking, the vortexed Amazon water, and the food, right? Yeah, cool. Then it was Austin. So that was Peru, and that was really useful. So I got the healing out of it. And so in the healing tradition I'm lineaged in, the 4 animals around the medicine wheel are serpent south, jaguar west, hummingbird north, eagle east. And on this journey, I'd gone from serpent through jaguar to hummingbird. It hadn't quite got to eagle. And towards the end of the dieta, it was essentially handed off from hummingbird to eagle. With that being, because hummingbird is the level of story, which I've mentioned before, right? Like you make an intervention at the level of story and you kind of change reality around it. And the story that I stepped into was, though your heart is healed, the new story is the kind of health journey out of it. And in particular, like he showed me that it was that remaining part happens in Tasmania. And that's when I was handed off to kind of like eagle. That will be important for when I tell you about what happened when we go back to the farm. I'm like, okay, cool. So that's why eagle hasn't showed up yet, because I was sort of, I don't want to say stuck, but still doing the work of the north of like changing story. And then once that had done, kind of clicked over to the east, right? The level of the field itself, right? And so we get to Austin, which I did not take pictures of because it's actually not that, it's a great, fine enough town, but it's not a picture place, right? It's not like Merida, right? That's beautiful. But I took this one because I could scarcely think of something more Austin hipster, I guess, than a floppy disk repair company sign on a bar called Handlebar with one of those little scooters out the front of it. So this is the entirety of the Austin experience. But that was really powerful to come out of the jungle and to be able to hang out with sort of premium members first, because we did an event and kind of like an initiation, which was fantastic in Austin, and then got to hang out with like listeners of the show and people who listen to THC and so on. And that was on my actual birthday in Austin. So again, it's funnily enough, it was a good way to end the healing journey of the Americas. And then I got to go to, got upgraded, right? And I mean, I guess I've been in a few business class flights now, but this is business class on Fiji Air or Air Fiji, and just everything about it, like the color and the little Pacific patterning, and I'm like, this is going to be so much fun. And it was. Of course it was. It was a business class flight in Fiji Air to Auckland. So that's a thing that happened to me this year. So it's going in this live stream, right? This is New Zealand. This isn't the Xena Beach. Xena Beach is a couple of bays up, but that's that same black sand beach. And again, I was here as, this is where I left Australia from first. Now, this is important. Part of the healing journey and moving into this final phase of healing and being in place in Tasmania was a recapitulation and like a re-ceremonialization of, it's almost like what happened in 2022 is the completion of a 20-year journey that began, it's a bit less than 20 years, but pretty close to, it will be 20 years next year. I know that because it's next year will be the 20th anniversary of Return of the King. And that's the year I moved to New Zealand, right? So being in New Zealand and then coming back to Australia was the completion of a phase that began with me at 21 or whenever I left, going to New Zealand and then London and then all of that kind of stuff and around. As we move into the next decade of, for this show, I'm just going to say unreliable travel, but just chaos, right? This was a way of kind of ending that phase. It was almost like a Saturn return without a Saturn return. And to do it, it had to kind of ceremonially touch all this stuff. So this is, again, it kind of made sense to me in the jungle. Like, of course, I have to spend a month in New Zealand on a heart healing journey, at the end of the heart healing journey, because that's where I first found my heart. Like, I found it in the sense of the world, but also that's where I met James, like literally in Auckland. And so, like, of course, I bring the healed heart back to New Zealand for it to get this therapy. And that's part of this journey. But more than that, like, so I changed my flights on the way back to, I'm in Newcastle now for people listening to it. I'm here for Christmas, obviously. I changed my flights to come back to Tasmania via Newcastle, which is in the complete wrong direction, because this is where I left from, right? So this is a kind of like a good tip for, you know, making your whole life a ceremony, is if you can pick up what's going on, and that's what this was, like, to complete the arc fully, I had to come back to Newcastle, to the beginning point, to end it, to end that cycle, and to go to Tasmania, go back to the farm new, like as the beginning of a cycle. So that was the kind of, there's my there's my volcano, which I did. So I went to Newcastle and then I came back. I'm still jet lagged here. Like, look at the bags under my eyes, but came back into the wet midwinter of the valley. Now, let me tell you, I cried, obviously, coming over the hill. You sort of crest this hill to come into the valley. Cried when I saw the house, but I also promised James that I won't come back until I'm fixed from a life-threatening illness. And I don't use the word fix in a healing sense. I was being glib, but I'm like, I'm not coming back until I was fixed. And so there was a real sense of accomplishment that had happened when I, like, at the end of the treatment in New Zealand, the guy who's giving the treatment says, I mean, he probably shouldn't have said this because you shouldn't say this to anyone, but he's like, you will not have a heart attack. And I'm like, well, that's good. I kind of knew that, but like looking at all the metrics of where we began the healing, or the sessions to where we finished it. So I came back fixed, unfit, right? Because I hadn't been able to do much in the way of exercise for a year or training or whatever, but fixed. So I was proud of that. But also, so we have eagles. Remember what I said about hummingbird and eagle? We have eagles in southern Tasmania, beautiful ones, a couple of different kinds. We've got sea eagles and wedge-tailed eagles and so on. And I know this because they sometimes eat our chickens, which we don't mind. It's an honor. We've never seen, it's not quite true. I used to see a breeding pair, and this is important. I started to get heart symptoms on a morning walk about 6 in the morning, and it was midwinter, and I thought, oh, the air must be cold and I've got a stitch. But there was a breeding pair of eagles that I would sort of greet on these walks. And the morning I get back to the farm, get out of the car, and we go for a walk up to the top of the farm and see the chickens and stuff, right? I hadn't been there for 4 months. And there are 3 eagles circling about, like they were waiting, like above the farm as we show up and get out. And they just stayed for about 20 minutes. as we were just sort of walking around, circling above us, above the farm. And that was the whole, okay, I get it. Like, you know what it's like when that happens. But we'd never seen three before. And they certainly don't just, so like they were waiting to land, like planes waiting to land. They just circled around and around, sort of watched as I was wandering around the farm. And then we went back inside because to the point that they were there that long, we got not sick of looking at them. But it's like, well, I get the message, right? We can go in. I'm not going to stand there because we could do this all day, et cetera, et cetera. But that was the kind of sign that I'm like, okay, I get this. I get what was going on. And then I got to unpack. Now, I'm good at packing after so much travel, right? And let me tell you, when you're on your own for 4 months and you have to pack, I had 2 suitcases. Let me explain why. Not for Mariah reasons, although a bit. Like I had to work. So the shamanic healing stuff takes up almost a suitcase, especially if you're running a workshop with a bunch of the stuff as well. But then on top of that, I had to pack for the tropics, scuba diving, the Andean mountains, urban living, the Amazon jungle, midwinter in New Zealand. Like it was crazy. And when James would come over, we'd sort of like swap suitcases and they'd send stuff back with him and so on. But I remember in the jungle, because you can only take a backpack for the 2 weeks or so, 2 and a bit weeks that you're there. And I got really good, like I knew every single item intimately in both of those suitcases. And I knew where they were. And there's this strange moment of, and that felt like being on Earth. That felt like an incarnation, right? Because one, it's temporary, like you were down here just for a moment. But I had a new appreciation for like the thingness of things, right? So I stole a plastic cup because I didn't have any from the Ecuadorian. It was like would be worth 1 cent. Didn't steal chandeliers or something from the Ecuadorian retreat because I needed it in the jungle because we were dieting a couple. I was dieting a couple of the stones to take the water to the initiation in Austin. So I had to have Amazon water and the stones, and I didn't have a cup for them. So I used this cup that I took from one retreat to the next. So I knew every little object. It was really fascinating to unpack and have a sense of kind of like well done stuff, and to problem solve and live a life with just these things. It was very. Remember the movie, like was it Apollo 11, Apollo 13, where they try to work out how they can fix the spacecraft with only the stuff that's on board. It sort of felt like that. But I have a new appreciation for things and the sanctity of humble things was what it was really. It's a strange. I mean, it's strange enough, and it affected me enough to be able to mention it on the live stream. Right? Is like that. Yeah, that was a big moment, and it got me thinking about the sort of end of travel, or at least the temporary pause on sacred travel, if such a thing can happen. Because the other thing that I sort of observed was, over the 4 months of getting flights, flying got worse and worse and worse, more and more delays, etc., and more lost luggage and all the rest of it, to the point where by the time I was leaving the US to get to New Zealand, I'm like, thank God I actually made it out of this mess of an industry in controlled demolition, right? And I was sort of thinking about that because the next thing we did travel-wise, this all came back when we went to another wine-growing valley, to the Barossa, for James's birthday. And so that I had enough time, like I just got on this big trip, and then it was a few weeks later of going on, dare I say, like a quote-unquote normal sort of holiday. And that put into relief the idea of travel and sacred travel and objects and so on. So I'm very happy about that. And the other thing that kind of happened was the Wiccan conference. Do I have a picture of that? Oh yeah, so this is the, yeah, very lesbian haircut there, Gordon, but coming back to the frost of the farm and so on was really cool. But this is the Barossa. This is where bougie Australians go to drink wine at the source, right? Then of course, spring on the farm. This is before we started planting, so I don't have a picture of it now, but there we have our the lemon tree in the middle, our white tree of cocktails, grew through the winter, as you can plainly see there. But obviously that's the inside of our, that's the outside of it in early spring of our greenhouse. The one to the right, I bought online from like eBay or something, and we put it up, and I'm like, this is domestic. We get some big winds down there. This isn't going to last. And it didn't. It blew over into a kind of amusing crumpled heap recently. So we're back down to one greenhouse, which is fine. But it's good to be able to be doing my morning walks again and to bring you up to date. This is Christmas in Newcastle, right? So that was that kind of brings me to now and looking at next year, 2023, and so on. Because I managed to the show grew with I think I've made up most of the episodes. This will be one of them. Because there was a few weeks there. Obviously, I didn't do any shows. I recorded one. Didn't do any shows when I was in the jungle. Only managed one in Ecuador. Wasn't doing weekly shows in Merida. And I had to think, like, I am on a healing journey. Like, I do actually need to relax. I think I sort of made it up. But by the same token, the show's now past its 300th episode. And 300 episodes ago, this is 302, but 300 episodes ago, podcasts were a host and a guest talking audio only for 60 minutes. And then it became, then you get like the THC versions of it, which is like podcasting 1.2 rather than 2.0, where it's the 60 free, 60 paid combination. And they still work really well. But as you've probably worked out, here I am doing a live stream, but also making sure as many guests as possible can do video. I don't want to make the show a video podcast. The podcast is a podcast. But what I want to do is think about other stuff I want to say and how to say it. So I spent a lot of time working on that, right? Because I want to do videos in addition to the show. Like this stuff, I want to do, I have some takes on like the Necronomicon or different oracle card decks, like 13-minute videos about a bunch of stuff. So as we move into next year, I want to do more stuff like that. In fact, one of the reasons for the live stream is to test my Christmas present to myself, which is this new camera to that end, right? So that's kind of some of the stuff I'm thinking of for next year, because I'm also thinking blogging is completely dead. In a funny way, it's having a fantastic afterlife in the form of stuff like Substack. And I've already got a newsletter list associated with the blog. But if I get to do more video stuff, I can kind of change what the blog is and making it sort of not necessarily shorter articles, but just like sharing with commentary a thing that I found and having it be a little bit more Substacky, as well as notifying people when new shows are out and all the rest of it. But it's funny, right? Like to change the podcast to accommodate video changes the blog in a way that has got me excited about doing all three. And that kind of emerged out of how I think about what's going on in the world and what I went through in a good sense and the sort of transformations that happened with 2022. So that's what I'm thinking. And at the moment, we will probably go back to weekly shows. And I think they might even be, I just need to run the numbers and the timings on this, but I think they might even be live. So one of the things I'm looking at is there will be an allotted time. When the show began, I used to call it Podcast Thursday, and the show would be out every Thursday. And I kind of want to do that again, but I kind of want it to be live so that you know that actually it'll be my Friday morning. But for most of you watching or listening to this, Thursday night, there will be a live show. It'll be something like this. Obviously not in an echoey holiday rental, but like a proper setup. And so I'm looking at maybe fortnightly solo shows where they'll be live and fortnightly guests. Because when I think about, I've got short stuff that I want to say, just a take on an oracle card deck is not worth a full hour-long live stream. But that's sort of what I'm thinking of at the moment is to still do guests because I love it and I love the show, but also commit to having a show at a regular time, right? And that's, I'm going to sit with that over this little, such as it is, Christmas break. I'm still, recording at 7 a.m. on Midsummer morning. But that's what I'm thinking of for Rune Soup. Obviously, if you listen to the show, or you might already be aware of it, the thing that I'm most excited about from a premium member content perspective next year is what I'm calling the foundations. And that is going to be a very different way of delivering longer course material, where we look at the foundational components of Western magical practice, from like building altars to scrying to like, casting circles, all that kind of like, I don't want to call it basic or beginner because it's not, in the same way doing deadlifts is, well, that's a bad example. Doing bicep curls or leg lifts aren't basic, they're foundational, right? You don't ever stop doing them, but you get better at them. And getting better at them means you get better at other stuff. So the criteria for what I've put in the foundations course is exactly that. It's like, what are the things in magic that allow you to get better at magic, like scrying and being good with circles and all the rest of it? And so that I'm really excited for. And we're doing that in Q1 and Q2 because it's going to take longer than a quarter to do. So I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be delivered in a very different way. So I'm excited creatively on that level. And the other one, as I mentioned at the beginning, Fortune's Fools is days away from, like James is laying out the book now. It's not days away from shipping. It's days away from moving into production, right? We've still got to finalize the card backs and a few of the other cards, but the book is basically done and being laid out. And so that's an early next year production and shipping. They are still available. If I remember, I'll put a link to buy some below this, because the book has turned out, I'm really happy with it. Like, this is my fortune telling book. This is my book of Thoth, right? So it's not just like a book that goes along with the cards. And so I'm so fucking happy with it. And that'll be out soon. And like, apologies for the delay, but by the same token, fucking Hollywood movies are delayed by up to 2 years. This one will be delayed by almost a year, thanks to a life-threatening illness. So yes, I know a couple of people have whined or complained about it. Grow up, frankly. We definitely did our best. I don't know what you think we were doing at that time. But regardless, thank you for your patience, everyone else who has been patient with it. Here it comes, and it's going to be fucking good. So that's what I'm thinking for 2023, which is really nice. Get this project off the plate by the end of January, so that I can work on the conclusion to the Dot trilogy, which has begun. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happened on this adventure that I haven't mentioned on my little trip through the Americas, but it's to do with cunning traditions and so on, which I kind of mentioned when I gave the presentation at the Australian Wiccan conference. That's the sort of the shape of the Dot trilogy. Star.Ships is the past, Animistic is the present, and to be determined, although it does have a very good name, is kind of like the future. I've got like the three worlds thing going, and it's sort of what we do and how we are in the world that's coming with that sort of material. So I can get Fortune's Fools out the gate in the next couple of weeks, and that gives me, dare I say, a normal year of apparently widespread civil unrest and blah, 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 to just have like the book and the clients and the show. And on the client note, at the moment, I probably will release, I just need to work out, once I get Fortune's Fools off the slate, I can open up more time to for clients. But at the moment, like, it's a little bit light on in January because I just need to make sure these fucking cards get out the fucking door, right? So yeah, that was my 2022 and where it got me. And these are my thoughts at the moment for 2023, which is to say, yeah, I can continue the healing journey, obviously, in the fitness sense. Fortune's Fools out the door very soon. Obviously, the third book in the Dot trilogy will not be out in 2023. Well, I say obviously, that will depend on the Scarlets, but I know that, well, it will depend on me to write it first, but then it will depend on the Scarlets. And I'm pretty sure the slate's full for next year. So 2023 is the writing of it. 2024, apparently just in time for World War III. So it's like Indiana Jones in the hat, right? Like, just before the door closes, I'm going to get everything that I need for the apocalypse out the door. My card set, my trilogy, and the foundations, right? Yeah, that's the sort of 2023 goals and plans. I would, if you listen to I would like to travel, like not the time of spending 4 months overseas on a heart healing journey is done. But there are some other places to do with the book that I would like to go or get back to. And this is just a fucking hot tip for you guys as well. If you watched the forecast episode with Austin, don't book anything that isn't non-refundable, no questions asked before the end of January. Because for Socrates, that's the biggest turning point. And it's bigger than the beginning of Putin's special operation, or whatever you want to call it, in February of this year. So whatever happens is panics the market more than that. So just be a bit patient if you're planning your own trips yourself, right? But yes, thank you. I'm glad you thought that was funny. This has been really cool. This has been really good. I wasn't sure. I like doing live streams, to be honest. Probably, I don't know. What do people think in the chat? Do I want to do? Is this good enough without the video, the images to go out? Probably. I'll just mention in the show notes that a big chunk of the live stream was actually me going through my holiday snaps. But I think I might put it out as an audio one as well at some stage. I'm not going to do that with every live stream. This is one of the things that I mean about I want to do more video specific stuff, right? So if you are listening to this and you haven't got around to subscribing on YouTube, or probably YouTube or Odyssey, because I do both of them quite religiously. I don't keep up with Rumble, and I probably should. But if you're ideologically opposed to YouTube, on the one hand, I get it. But on the other hand, there's going to be content that won't just come out as audio. So if you're listening to this, you'll be like, all right, I fucking get it. Like and subscribe. Or however, yeah, I'm going to start saying stuff like that. Yeah, if I do video only content, I'm going to have to do like, hey, I'm Gordon from Rune Soup. I haven't worked it out yet, but I'm going to be saying stuff like at the beginning of videos. So look out for that awkwardness. I know you've all noticed the thumbnails. James continues to outdo himself in shaming me with them. But yeah, so Will thinks a fair amount of it translate without images. True. I might even make it a public album and I can paste it on the blog or something. But if you're listening to this, well, you've got to the end of it. Well done. You can imagine what the greenhouse looks like and so on and so forth. But yeah, like not every live stream will become a podcast. I just think that most people listen still rather than watch, and I get it. So that's, yeah, that was my 2022. I hope yours was good as well. And I hope somehow that 2023 will be better, right? Better for everyone. But that's it. Happy solstice, winter for most of you, summer here, of course. And however you're doing the holidays, happy holidays. And yeah, I'm not actually taking time off, so expect episodes soon, as in after Christmas. And for premium members, don't forget, we have the New Year's group journey. All of that's on the calendar. But yeah, nice one. Thanks, guys.